Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 30th of September. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, the US Vice President says the federal government is headed for a shutdown as the uncertainty sends gold prices to another record high.
Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu back a 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza, but it appears unlikely to win support from Hamas.
Plus, from landslide to low poll ratings, Keir Starmer bets on a message of decency over division as he seeks to revitalise Labour's political fortunes.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The price of gold has hit another record high as fears mount that a looming US government shutdown will stall data releases crucial for charting the Federal Reserve's rate path. The spot price of the metal climbed above $3,865 an ounce as Democratic and Republican leaders remained far apart after meeting President Trump. Democrats want to extend healthcare subsidies and reverse Medicaid cuts from Trump's tax law before agreeing to a spending bill. Speaking after the White House meeting, Vice President JD Vance sought to blame the Democratic Party for any shutdown.
If they want to talk about how to fix American healthcare policy, let's do it. The Speaker would love to do it. The Senate Majority Leader would love to do it. Let's work on it together. But let's do it in the context of an open government that's providing essential services to the American people. That's all that we're proposing to do. And the fact that they refuse to do that shows how unreasonable their position is. I think we're headed into a shutdown because the Democrats won't do the right thing. I hope they change their mind, but we're going to see.
JD Vance speaking there as US government funding is set to expire at 5:01 a.m. London time tomorrow. If funding lapses, the first major data release that could be delayed would be Friday's Bureau of Labour Statistics employment report. The agency's marquee report on CPI inflation could follow, while data on retail sales and new housing construction are also at risk of delay in an extended shutdown.
Now, President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say they have agreed a 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza. At a joint press conference in the White House, the two leaders presented the framework as an ultimatum to Hamas to surrender and play no role in the future of Gaza. Trump called the plan an opportunity for, quote, eternal peace in the Middle East, beginning with the release of the remaining Israeli hostages.
I also want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for agreeing to the plan. If accepted by Hamas, this proposal calls for the release of all remaining hostages immediately, but in no case more than 72 hours.
President Trump said the plan had the support of a number of Middle Eastern leaders. However, the prospect of peace remains unclear without the direct involvement of Hamas. The plan involves Gaza being handed over to a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee overseen by a board of peace, which would be chaired by President Trump, with former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair playing a role. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel will achieve its objectives either way.
But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself.
Prime Minister Netanyahu there, as President Trump said that Israel would have full US backing to destroy Hamas if it rejects the deal.
Bloomberg understands that China has asked the Trump administration to officially declare that it opposes Taiwan's independence. The suggested wording is stronger than the Biden administration's previous statement, which was that US officials do not support the island seeking formal independence. The Trump administration hasn't decided on the request, which is part of a broader list of demands from Beijing. The State Department said yesterday that Washington's position on Taiwan hasn't changed and the US remains committed to the One China policy. Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman said Taipei continues to closely monitor Beijing's manipulative narratives.
EU leaders will this week discuss major new defence projects, including plans for a so-called European drone wall. Bloomberg's Michal Kubala reports now.
It's a push that's gained urgency after a wave of Russian incursions into NATO airspace. The European Commission has outlined plans to boost air and missile defences, which leaders will discuss in Copenhagen in the coming days. The drone wall would build on Ukraine's battlefield experience and involve European startups and experts. Then, an Eastern Flank Watch project aims to add layers of protection against hybrid threats. It's all a part of EU plans to close gaps in European defences by 2030. In Brussels, Michal Kubala, Bloomberg Radio.
In the UK, the Prime Minister will use his Labour Party conference speech today to say Britain faces a defining choice between decency and division. Keir Starmer is seeking to adopt a tougher line on immigration while going on the attack against Nigel Farage's poll-leading Reform UK party. Starmer's speech comes as his Chancellor Rachel Reeves used her conference speech to hit back at those criticising how she's handling the economy.
With the global uncertainty that we have seen ripple through financial markets, there are still critics out there who would too readily forget the consequences of reckless economic choices. We will never, ever do what the Conservatives did to ordinary working people in this country.
Rachel Reeves spoke there as new polling from Ipsos shows her to be the most unpopular Chancellor since records began almost 50 years ago. While she's largely been able to keep the bond markets on side, voters now see her less favourably than Kwasi Kwarteng, the architect of Liz Truss's mini-budget that saw debt premiums spiral.
Now, GlaxoSmithKline CEO Emma Walmsley is stepping down after 9 years leading the pharmaceutical giant. But her departure means the UK is losing another high-profile female business leader. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
Despite efforts to attract more female CEOs to the FTSE index, the number will remain at just 9 after GSK CEO Emma Walmsley's exit. The lack of women leading the country's biggest firms has been criticised by campaigners who say businesses have boosted board representation but failed to crack leadership roles. Some of the country's biggest companies did appoint women to top jobs this year, including WPP, National Grid and Entain. But their arrivals come alongside departures from other senior figures, such as Pets at Home CEO Lisa McGowan, who left this month, and Rita Rose Gang, who'll step down from shopping centre landlord Hammerson in 2026. Walmsley, who will leave her role at the end of the year, was a prominent fixture, leading the firm through the pandemic and the separation of its consumer business. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Those are your top stories on the programme this morning. Looking at the markets, the MSCI Irish Pacific Index is 0.3% higher this morning. We're keeping an eye on those gold prices, up 0.8% to $3,864, so just off the highs that have been hit into trading, but still hovering close to it. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index holding on to its weakness yesterday, down slightly on the day, so the Euro's trading at 117.30 this morning. Euro Stoxx 50 futures are down by 0.2%.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on the latest regarding risks of a US government shutdown. But before we discuss that, something else has caught our eye this morning. Are you decent at games, Stephen Carroll?
No, horrible at them is the short answer. But actually, this really appeals to me because it sort of combines a few different ways of exercising parts of your brain. So Alpha Dots is the Bloomberg's new daily word game. So it's sort of a cross between a word puzzle, a crossword, and then also a chart. So I'll try to explain it and see if you follow me, right? Okay, so there are cryptic clues like a crossword that suggests the word you're trying to guess. You know how many letters it is and you have to try and fill in the blanks. What you get in addition is a line graph which on the vertical axis goes from A at the top to Z at the bottom. So the dot on the chart will tell you whether it's closer to the start or the end of the alphabet. And of course, they're all relative as well. You also have a chance to guess, so you can basically say, okay, is there an A in the word? And it will tell you where it is. Now, you'd have a fair idea if it was an A because it's going to be at the top of the chart as well. But that's a mistake I made the first time I played it too. But it is, you can sort of piece together the bits then. I have to say, when I was trying it, I either got the word immediately based on the clue or I had absolutely no idea. So I made quite a lot of use of the plot feature to try and guess what the word was. Really diverse subjects in it, lots to play with.
And it's really good fun. It is way harder to explain this game than it is just to play it. I got it once I played it, and it's I don't know, so many people are addicted to daily crosswords. Great for your brain.
Yes, and it is a daily game as well, so you can all join in and play, and of course you can share how you get on, how long it takes you to solve it, how many hints you needed. I needed a lot to try and get to the end as well. Bloomberg.com/alphadots to play.
Now let's bring you more on the looming government shutdown in the United States after a meeting of congressional leaders and President Trump, which ended without agreement.
A little earlier, we spoke to our senior US government editor, Derek Woolbank, and started by asking him whether a deal could be found before tomorrow's deadline.
Well, Stephen, I would say at this point, there are certainly exit ramps. There are ways that you can get to a conclusion without a shutdown, but they are becoming increasingly distant. Right now, Republicans and Democrats are locked in a stalemate. Democrats are demanding some health care money that Republicans do not want to give. And right now, I mean, it's not even looking like they want to talk seriously. Congressional leaders joined President Donald Trump and Vice President JD Vance at the White House. Those talks seemed to be a frank and candid exchange of views, but it doesn't necessarily look like we are any closer to a deal as a result of them. Indeed, after the meeting, Donald Trump posted something on his social media mocking Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, and very much not seeming like the sort of guy who is looking to try and find 7 Democratic votes he currently doesn't have.
So then, in terms of what a shutdown means for Donald Trump, for his administration, what might happen?
Well, Caroline, I would say in a shutdown, you sort of start with the idea that things start off medium bad and then get worse as time progresses. And you could say that in a number of different ways. But basically, things start to have consequences, let's say, in phases. And so initially you'll sit there and say, okay, national parks are shut down. And you're evicting people from federal campsites, and it's things like that. Eventually, you get to the point where U.S. troops in foreign deployments aren't getting paid, and members of the military might be missing mortgage payments and things of that nature. And so your political consequences start stepping up and stepping up. You have difficulties in the U.S. government. Economic data that markets rely on may not be released on time. Other things of that nature. The more that this goes on, the more it gets difficult. And one of the key questions is going to be, who do U.S. voters blame for the shutdown, particularly independent voters? Now, I've seen some polling initially suggest that maybe by a small margin, independent voters are currently saying Republicans are a little bit more responsible. But a lot of this stuff does come down to a pox on both their houses. And we talked to Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from South Carolina, and one of the things he was saying was that Republicans, in his view, have learned a lesson about asking for policy things they don't have the votes for in context of a shutdown, saying that when you play that game, you only wind up getting burned and have to eventually eat funding the government for nothing in exchange.
Yeah, okay, so the consequence is potentially big politically, and of course the first piece of economic data that could be disrupted by this is the jobs report and the initial jobless claims numbers to come later this week. In the meantime, are there issues that we should be watching in these negotiations where we might see progress or the key blocking of any deal?
Well, the thing that I'm looking for is what's your possible exit ramp? And the most obvious one that I see that could be taken if people wanted to take it, that's my big caveat, if people wanted to take it, is the idea of trying to extend some Obamacare subsidy money and do that a little bit for maybe a year or 2 years or something like that. There are some cost controls you could put that on. And if that were seriously being discussed, it's possible that lawmakers could agree to a short-term stopgap bill to kind of keep the government open while they worked on the legislative language of that. So that's one of those things that could be an exit ramp. But right now, we don't see people looking at taking that. The biggest caveat of all that I have to say, though, is across all of these sort of U.S. government examples of people hitting themselves in the face governmentally, you get a lot of no's before you get to yes. And so, it's very true, that old axiom, it's always darkest before the dawn, but that really is the case here. A lot of the times, U.S. negotiations become a sort of Vicar of Dibley sketch where it's no, 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 yes.
Our senior US government editor, Derek Wallbank, proving that he can be funny in every culture by the sound of things as well, getting a very specifically British reference into the end of our conversation a little earlier. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Now, let's turn our attention to the Middle East. So the US President and Israel's Prime Minister agreed a plan to end the war in Gaza, but there's no indication yet whether Hamas will accept the offer. Joining us now is our Middle East and Africa Managing Editor, Paul Wallace, for more on this story. Paul, hello. There are 20 points on this plan. What is actually new compared to previous attempts to end the war?
Hi, Caroline. Well, one of the things that is new is Trump setting sort of a firm deadline for ending this war, which is that would happen within 72 hours of both sides accepting this proposal, which now means Hamas, because Israel has accepted it. It would definitively see Israel pulling its forces back from Gaza. Not immediately. It would be done in stages, and Israel would maintain a buffer zone within the Palestinian territory for an indefinite period. The language also made clear that the U.S. Believes Gazans should be allowed to stay in the territory, that there's no more talk of turning it into a Riviera, as Trump did back in earlier in the year, just after he returned to power. In fact, the wording now says it encourages Palestinians to stay there, but that if they do leave voluntarily, they must be allowed to come back in. That's different. The ramping up of aid too, and Trump's plan specifying that will be done through UN agencies. Again, that's a change, and sort of implies that the GHF, the sort of Israeli-linked group that has been managing aid since an Israeli blockade ended a few months ago, that GHF would no longer be working. So there are quite a lot of things in this plan. I think it's fair to say that both sides, if they accept this, will have conceded on some points. But obviously the big question is what Hamas says. They're studying the proposal.
Have we heard anything from them yet? I mean, what could we deduce that they might respond to this?
So we've heard nothing beyond that they are studying it, and they've not said when they're going to give an answer by. There is a lot of thinking that they won't, among analysts, that they won't accept this because it's too much. The concessions on their part would have to be too big. They would have to surrender and give up all the hostages that they still hold, 48 of them, roughly 20 of whom are alive. They'd have to give them up immediately, without Israel fully withdrawing its forces from Gaza at that point. So there's certainly a lot of skepticism, and there are already some people saying that this is a bit of a cynical plan from both the Americans and Israel that will end up making, that will end up being, if Hamas rejects it, then it will be presented as something that proves Hamas and does not want peace, whereas Israel does. So there's a lot of skepticism, but it is certainly, I think, this is the closest we've got to ending this war and achieving a ceasefire in many, many months.
Okay, so it's significant. What about the involvement of states like Qatar and Turkey for this plan, maybe potentially to work?
I think that definitely is important that those countries you've mentioned, Qatar, which is a key mediator between Hamas and Israel, and Turkey, and broadly speaking, the Arab world, the likes of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they are on board with this plan, and it seems as if Egypt, which is another mediator and obviously borders Gaza, it's also on board with this. So that might increase the pressure on Hamas to to accept this. I think some of those things I mentioned earlier, the wording that says Gazans should stay, or should be encouraged to stay in Gaza, and that if they do leave, it must be voluntary, and they must be allowed to return as and when they want to. Language like that is important, and Trump also spoke about an eventual pathway being created for Palestinian statehood. Again, that language is very important for other Middle Eastern countries, and obviously Palestinians themselves. They wanted to see something like that. That's the kind of language that is arguably amounts to a concession on Netanyahu's part, and already there's been some criticism within the country that this is the kind of language that could increase pressure on Israel to eventually accept a Palestinian state, which it does not want to do at all. So there's there is, as Trump would see it, there's something for both warring sides in this. It certainly is key that Turkey, Qatar, and other Middle Eastern states are on board. And that's something that's been a change in the last week. Trump met with those states in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last Tuesday, and it seemed to be a very constructive meeting. And much of the plan that was announced yesterday or sort of published yesterday came out of that meeting with those states.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.